I want to take the time in this video to talk more about the actual welfare effects of a price ceiling. But let's start by reviewing what the value of consumer surplus, producer surplus, and total surplus would be in our market if we had a competitive equilibrium. So our competitive equilibrium here is given by P star being the equilibrium price and Q star being the equilibrium quantity. Given this outcome, the value of consumer surplus would be areas A, B, and C. This assumes, right, each consumer pays the price of P star and that the product goes to the consumers who value it most. Producer surplus is going to be the difference between P star for each unit produced and the supply curve. And so producer surplus is going to be areas D, E, and F. And this assumes that the folks who produce the product are those with the lowest marginal cost of production. So total surplus in this market is going to be the summation of areas A, B, C, D, E, and F. Now let's consider the impact of the price ceiling. Price ceiling is binding in this case, and as we said earlier, that with the price ceiling, the market price is going to be P subscript C, and the equilibrium quantity will only be Q subscript C. So in this particular case, let's take a look at what the value of consumer surplus would be. Now remember, with this price ceiling, there's no guarantee that the people who value the product most will get it, because there technically are a lot more people who want to buy the product at this price than what the sellers are willing to provide. So we're going to make an assumption, and this is a best case scenario though, that of all the people that want the product, the folks who actually get it are those who value it most. And remember, that's no guarantee. But if we assume that they're the ones that value it most and they're the ones that get it, then what we see is that consumer surplus will be the difference between what those folks were willing to pay and what they actually pay. So consumer surplus would be areas A, B, and D. Now, for producer surplus, you're looking at, there's no question who are going to be the producers who provide it. The producers who provide the product are going to be the ones with the lowest marginal cost of production. And so for producer surplus, it's just going to be area F. So total surplus in the market is just going to be areas A, B, D, and F, which means that we have a deadweight loss here. And the deadweight loss, as we said in the earlier video, is the surplus that is unrealized. And we can see that by comparing the values of total surplus with the price ceiling to the values of total surplus without. And what we see is that the difference here, or the deadweight loss, is that we have lost areas C and area E. Now one thing that can happen that we didn't discuss earlier whenever you have a price ceiling is that there are so many people, right, that want the product, but only limited amount will get the product, is that black markets can emerge. And a black market is just a secondary market where the product is exchanged in an informal market. So you have the price you would pay in the store, and then you have the price that you would pay on the street. And technically, right, if we're only going to provide QC units, the price on the street, we'll call it P subscript ST, the price you'd pay on the street would be as high as what the consumers would be willing to pay to receive this many units of the good. So that's an other effect of what happens with price controls, in particular here, a price ceiling. Now let's take a closer look at the welfare implications of a price floor. And once again, the best way to analyze what those actual implications are is to start by identifying what the amount of surplus would be under a competitive equilibrium. So in the absence of any sort of price floor, market price would be P star, consumer surplus would be areas A, B, and C. Producer surplus would be areas D and E. So total surplus being the summation of those two, A, B, C. D, and E. Now let's go ahead and put in the price floor, and at the price floor we know that in this particular case it's binding, so consumers are going to have to pay P sub F for every unit consumed. That's going to be the same price that the sellers receive, and the actual amount of transactions is only going to be equal to Q sub F. Now here there's no question about what consumers are going to get the product. It's going to be the consumers who value it most. And so consumer surplus with the price floor is just going to be area A. Producer surplus, however, is a little harder to figure out because technically we have more producers that want to provide the product than the actual amount of product that will be sold. There's no guarantee that the people with the lowest marginal cost of production will be the ones that sell the product, because technically any of these sellers would be willing and able to sell the product at a price of PF. We're going to look at a best case scenario and assume that the producers who actually provide the product are the ones with the lowest marginal cost of production. So they're each going to receive PF. They were willing to provide at this part here, right, represents the minimum price they were willing to accept. And so producer surplus with the price floor is going to be areas B and D. So total surplus when we have a price floor in effect is going to be areas A, B, and D. And once again, when you compare the two different systems, what we see is that we end up losing areas C and areas E whenever we impose the price floor. And so we refer to areas C and E, those lost areas, as the deadweight loss. Okay, surplus that goes unrealized because we have unrealized gains from trade.